Morning to everybody. Today we are going to have these projects which we have started in November last year. Now we continue till August this year, presenting Bengali literature in English. The idea behind this project was to introduce the rich traditions of Bengali literature to the younger generation who doesn't live in Bangladesh or India. And we are happy to notice that this has been accepted by the community. Beyond the Bengali community, other people also appreciated this effort. And this is a very effective way to transform the younger generation to the spirit of literature. And we have been honored by many famous Canadian mainstream writers such as poets and novelists who every week comes here, gives us encouragement, speaks to us and explain their visions of future in literature here. And today we have poet Richard Greene here, and he will be our chief guest here. And we expect to hear from him. A poet is a visionary all the time. He sees beyond time. He thinks beyond time. His ideas are placed in the eternity. That's why we value the poets too much. And our young people who are here, living in a materialistic society, they will be growing up in the light of his enlightenment. And we have our Aninda Das, who will give an introduction to Richard Greene. Now Aninda will speak about him. Thank you.
But before that, please invite Greene there.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I request Mr. Richard Greene to take his seat here.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you, sir. You are blessed.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have our writer of the month, Mr. Richard Greene with us. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of him. So Mr. Greene is a professor of English literature at the University of Toronto. At the same time, he is also a poet, biographer, and also a critic. Mr. Greene was born in 1961 in St. John's, Newfoundland. Some of his major degrees include a BA Honours at the Memorial University of Newfoundland and a PhD at the Oxford University. He has written several poetries, out of which a poetry named Boxing the Compass won the Governor's General Literacy Award for Poetry in 2010. He likes to focus on creative writing as a teacher, and also one of his research and teaching interests are 28th century British literature. His first book, which is on the 18th century poet Mary Lipper, was published by the Oxford University Press in 1993. Some of his major publications are Dantes House, published in 2013, is set in the city of Siena, reflecting on the presence and absence, glory and disarray of our flawed life. This collection is written in fluent terza rima, which is basically a type of poetic rhythm. His another collection is Boxing the Compass, published in 2009, and as mentioned before, this was the one award-winning collection. This amazing poetry makes room for Saint Polycarp and his martyrdom, some church choirs, and most importantly, the Newfoundland whalers and very vividly remembered Portuguese fishermen. Next up, Republic of Solitude, released in 1994. This poetry reflects a wide range of subjects such as politics, spirituality, marriage, fatherhood, landscapes, the environment, Newfoundland culture, war, mortality, and the afterlife. His poetry has been widely admired for its unusual combination of technical competence and visionary intensity. And lastly, the biography on Edith Sitwell, who's described as an avant-garde poet, I'm not sure what that means, and an English genius by Mr. Greene. This biography gives us a view on the life of a 20th century female poet and the sheer courage involved in her becoming a poet.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, that's so very kind. Thank you for going to so much trouble. You found out all my secrets. Actually, that title, you didn't know what it exactly meant. I didn't make it up. The publisher gave the book that title. So you know that. Avant-garde means someone who is in the lead and does literary experiments. I'm so grateful to you for that, and actually quite humbled by your collection of books, because any poet in the English-speaking world knows one really important thing about 20th century literature, and that is that if you pay any attention to William Butler Yeats, and everyone pays attention to William Butler Yeats, the great Irish poet, you are paying attention to Tagore. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't hear me there yet. But Tagore is a huge influence on modern poetry. And now as I look at all these beautiful books, I feel so ignorant. So I have much, much more reading to do, and I'm so very glad that you're bringing these works into the Canadian culture, making them available, and it should have an extraordinarily beautiful and liberating effect. And also, I'm very grateful just to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation and your warm welcome. I should read some poems. The first few poems I'm going to read are largely concerned with a homeland. Now, you're going to have to forgive me because my idea of a homeland is not that far away, really. And some people here in this room have their homeland so many thousand miles away, and it's so much harder to get to, and so much more expensive, and so many more obstacles, that my complaining about the loss of my little homeland doesn't amount to anything. But yeah, there it is. I come from Newfoundland. Newfoundland is, as you know, the easternmost province in the country, and it's somewhat different than the rest of the country. When we're there, Newfoundlanders refer generally to the mainland, and that's like everything in the world except here. You know, he's from the mainland. is a way of saying he doesn't understand. And it's also a very deep criticism when someone says to you, you've been away. That you haven't been here, you haven't been with us, you don't know what's going on, you're becoming alien. And I slightly regret, that we just talked about this a little bit, that my children they spent part of their life there, but the last 20 years or so here. And so my first grandson was born 4 years ago, and another one is coming. And they will be Ontario boys, and that'll be good. And they'll have opportunities, and they'll meet nice people, and wonderful things will happen, but they won't have the other thing. And I suppose you can only have so many things in life. I wish they could have the homeland, but there it is. So the best I can do is write a poetry of memory. I'd like to start with a poem about my family. My father was largely raised by his grandfather. His own father wasn't about very much, so that he was often taken care of by his maternal grandfather, who in his youth had been a whaler. And he'd go hunting whales on these ships for a year at a time or 2 years. And then as time went on, he used to do things that, maybe I have to write a poem about this. His last job was as a rigger in a Montreal dry dock. So he'd climb up into the high masts and he would tie the ropes. And special skill tying ropes on these old sailing ships. But I'm desperately afraid of heights. So what a difference between me and my grandfather. He's up 120 feet in the air, very casually, no protection, no harness, nothing, just tying ropes on the thing. And I have difficulty getting past the 6th step on a ladder. I think I have to write about that. But for now, this will be about my great-grandfather, who is this man. Great-grandfather, whaler out of Nantucket, the harder sort who threw the harpoon, drew warm blood, made huge death on the open sea, came home one year to find his land fenced for ecclesiastical uses, tore it all down, told the priest to go to hell and would do his own praying after that. Sailed till his knees went stiff with berry on a ship stuck in Antarctic ice. My father worshipped him, remembered his deft hands that could put an arsehole in a cracky with a hammer and a handsaw. The old man signaled his affections, crafty, hard of hearing, heard the boy's words, even took his daughter's orders when she called him sir. Grew old jigging cod on the southern shore, then fell from a roof and lingered days to tell his last story, empty his mouth of good oaths. What I have of him is my father's reverence for his silence, a sense that pain will kill you if you speak of it.
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you. That stops with you. I can't drive a felt nail straight home, let alone contrive with glue and dowels some larger trophy of uncontested manhood. Mahogany tables, or that line of tight-knitted shelves, relics of cunning, of a mind that thrives on small perfections of geometry. For your last battle, you chose carpentry, as your grandfather hefted hand tools in your childhood. Wits decaying, you measured twice, cut once. So, we guess at the merits of joinery. Closed seams in maple, the grain of hardwood, hand planed, spoke shade, fit for endurance. Okay, so that's a sonnet.
You mentioned one thing, that modern poetry. So the poetry that we had before, the classical art, so how we are differentiating, or you are differentiating the modern poetry from the typical one? Is it the concepts or the presentation, or from which perspective?
That's a really huge question, and I think to approach it, you have to, or I have to, allow that many people do many different things, and I think in earlier times, certainly in Western Europe, let's say, for that tradition, there was more of a cultural consensus. I think most people tended to be Christian, most people had a fairly clear idea of what their morals were and how the struggles of a life ought to work out. And there was a lot of, certainly in English poetry, a lot of agreement on the use of certain forms. And you get to 1900 and things start splintering, that there's still a great many religious poets, and then there are also a great many atheist poets, agnostic poets, poets who become Buddhist, poets who become Jain poets. And so there's a great deal of diversity in belief. And also there's a great deal of experiment with form, and that people look for different symmetries in poetry. Some people stick with fixed line lengths and rhymes and stanzas, as in that tradition. But other people do interesting experiments, and they learn from other countries as well. So I guess I haven't answered your question. I've evaded your question very with a lot of words, haven't I? I think what I'm saying is that I think modern poetry is many things, and it's both matter and form. And it also mixed in is an adherence to tradition at the same time as people are making changes. So it's chaotic. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, at this time, our next topic will be our Sutana Das Badhan will take an interview of Mr. Poet Richard Greene, and after that, if the audience has any questions to the poet, they will be welcome, and he will try to answer those. Thank you.
Everyone, good morning, Dr. Greene.
Good morning.
I will be asking a number of questions to you, and then we will open it up to the audience. You guys can ask questions after. So my first question for you is, when did you find an interest in poetry, and what exactly inspired you?
My mother used to walk around the house reciting poetry. She had a much better memory than I have. The only poems that I actually remember fully, and I should be able to remember things, your memory's never been great, are ones that my mother used to recite. So she used to walk around the house and she'd say, recite A. Houseman, and so she'd say, "With rue my heart is laden, for golden friends I had, many a rose-lipped maiden and many a light-foot lad. By brooks too broad for leaping, the light-foot lads are laid, the rose-lipped girls lie sleeping in fields where roses fade." It's a very sad, sentimental poem, but it's one of the best.
Who's poet?
A.E. Houseman.
A.
Yeah, he's a sort of 1890s to a little forward, yeah. And my mother used to quote him and some others. So that sort of put a mark on me. But when I was in high school, I had a friend who was reading a lot of Robert Frost. And so I guess he got me very interested in that stuff. And I used to write a little, and then it became, I became more committed to it when I was about 20. Yeah.
Thank you. Now.
Oh, I'm reading two books. They're almost on the same subject. One is, they're both about the American Civil War, which I find one of the strangest events in world history. This sort of slaughter, 700,000 people being killed over the desire to retain slavery. It's a mystery. I've been reading book after book on this. So one that I'm reading is Shelby Foote's History of the Civil War, and the other is a more recent biography of the Union General and then President Ulysses S. Grant. The Grant book I'm listening to on audio in my car when I'm driving to work. The other one I read on the page.
That's really nice. So has your idea of poetry changed since you first started writing poetry?
In some ways it hasn't. I'm a rather cautious poet in a lot of ways, technically. I do write some free verse, but it tends to be, again, as they say, conservative free verse, by which I mean the lines tend to be of middling length, and I break the line on significant words. And otherwise, I would typically write in forms, and often enough in recent years they rhyme. They have regular line lengths and rhymes. So how have I changed? I think when I was younger, I wrote more in free verse, and now I tend to write more in stricter forms. Yeah, and I don't know why that happened.
Okay, fair enough. If you could go back in time and tell your younger writing self anything, what would that be?
Win the lottery. No, what would I tell it? I'm not sure. I think that I would just tell my younger self to keep at it. Because with each new thing you write, you change what you are as a writer. You take steps into a place you haven't been before. And that not knowing what comes next exactly, I mean, yeah, we all dream of writing a book about X. You know that joke that Margaret Atwood tells about the being approached at a party by a brain surgeon who says to her, when I retire, I'm going to try some writing. I'm going to write a book. And to which her answer is, yeah, and when I retire, I'm going to try some brain surgery. And which is quite funny, you know, is you develop your skills, you become good at it, and we all have a book out that we want to try to get at. But perhaps we'll never write that book. Perhaps we'll write some other book. And maybe the essence of a person's writing career can only be a rather short piece. You know, I think of so many wonderful writers whose best work is only half a dozen poems. You know, some poets have great, vast, collected poems, and some have that, and wonderful things are accomplished in that. In that short compass. So yes, I think there's another question I have to answer.
That's all right. I guess quality over quantity,
Sure.
right? I've been told to inform you to hold your microphone closer to your mouth so that camera can pick up what you're saying.
Gotcha.
So my next question is, what are you most proud of as a writer and as a poet?
Okay. What I'm most proud of is, I think, the sequence of Dantes House. I managed to say a lot of what I wanted to say in that, and to do it in a form I was content with. That is a longish sequence of poems contained in this book here. It's about, I think it's about 30 pages. It's a single long poem set in Italy, and what it does is it looks at contemporary Italy. It looks at the art of Italy, its history, and then within that, I'm telling a story about my own life, which has nothing to do with Italy, and it's written in, as you were observing the verse form terzerima, which is a 3-line stanza with a particular rhyme scheme, and it was used by Dante in the Divine Comedy. I can't reproduce what Dante wrote. And in a way, the book is about approaching the treasures of the past, but actually not ever being able to possess them. So the title of this book, which is, to come back, the thing I'm most proud of, is about something that's fake. If you go to the city of Florence, there is there a tourist destination called Dantes House. It's not Dantes House. It was built 100 years ago in a place where Dante's family might have lived. Well, they probably did live. He might have walked past this place. They put stuff in it that was like stuff that might have been there in 1300, but wasn't there. And it occurred to me that this funny little museum is a metaphor or a symbol for the kind of poetry that I was writing, that if I'm trying to approach this past, and again, Dante is about the Central European poet. You know, if you think of the European tradition of poetry, you know, the great names, Homer, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare. And Dante's house is Europe, Dante's house is Italy, but also Dante's house is that little stanza. And I don't write it exactly as he wrote it, partly because the English language doesn't rhyme properly. You've probably noticed that rhyming in English is rather different than rhyming in other languages. In Italian, so many words end with a vowel. So it's not how to create rhyme when you're writing, it's how to manage rhyme, because rhyme is always going to happen with those vowels coming back at you. Whereas in English, you know, there's 20 consonants, so the rhyming is much more difficult. And so using the verse form is not a natural thing to do. So my approach to that past is an attempt, but I'm never really going to get there. So, yeah. My personal favorite is a very obscure poet. He died about 20 years ago. His name was Peter Levy. He was a scholar at Oxford. He had once been a Catholic priest. He was an outsider in modern or in contemporary poetry. And I knew him at Oxford and venerated him and learned from him. But apart from him, lots of great names. T.S. Eliot, very much so. Yeats, Gerard Manley Hopkins. I wrote a biography of a poet named Edith Sitwell, who used to be famous but has now faded away. I had hoped my biography would bring her back, but I don't think it has. However, there are good jokes in the biography, so if you want to read something and laugh, please do buy the biography. It'll make you smile. But I did learn a lot from her. So those would be a few names. Yes, it did, and it's a danger. It's both a possibility and a danger. One is that you have a real encouragement in your life to engage with the literature that's been written, that is being written. It's your profession. But you don't want to come off being academic. You don't want to be abstract. You don't want to be tedious. Because it's nothing like academics who love their own opinions. You know, I love my work, but I'm aware of some of the absurdity. People pay me for opinions. That's not right. You should give away your opinions. But it's part of the work I do. I think living, working, kind of growing up in the university world has made me very conscious of the past of poetry. And also, it's given me a way of internationalizing my poetry a little bit. That it encourages you to read widely as well as temporally into the past. And so I think that's a good thing. Those are some of the strengths that come from academic life.
Same topic. Would you say that there's any conflict between your profession and poetry ever?
I think I'm really blessed to have employment. I have a lot of friends who are really good writers, and they have difficulty putting food on the table. So I honestly should never complain. I have friends who are bartenders. I have friends who make coffee. It's not an easy life for them. Whereas I get paid a decent salary to read books and to read people's writing and to talk about things I care about. That's great. If I ever complain about that, I think you should be very cross with me.
You spoke of your mother earlier and also about Dantes House, but in general, where else would you get the inspiration for your writing?
The truthful answer is, I think, has two strands. What I really, really would like to do, don't spread the word, I would like to write a really good religious poetry. That's what I would like to do. But the craft of 20th century and 21st century poetry in English is very much an emphasis on the material, on being gritty, on describing experiences that arise from an we use the word earned and unearned. That earned experience, that if you write a poem and then you leap to a conclusion about this experience, it has to be somehow earned by what you've presented. That you can't simply make an assertion. So that's something I struggle with. On the other hand, very often when I write a poem, it's because I've read something lately that has surprised me or inspired me. And I've heard something rattling around in my head from another writer, and that shows me a way it can be done. I have to be careful not to plagiarize, of course, you give credit. And so, yeah, that's two strands. Yeah. I think reading is very important. I think that certainly a young writer in the Bengali culture has all this wealth here to draw on, and to somehow, to immerse in that, and then, also engage with other cultures and see where it gets you. I guess what I'm saying is that if people are really true to their experiences, they have a head start. Being truthful, being authentic is not everything, because you have to write well. You have to learn the tricks of the trade. But without that sort of depth, that sort of purchase on a lived experience that matters, a way of seeing things, a way of living, a way of being passionate, then writing well isn't enough. There's a lot of slick writers out there, but what it brings together the passion and the cultural awareness and the writing skills, that young writer has a step ahead. Also, get connected, get to know people.
Now, moving on to your work, your book, Boxing the Compass, it won the Governor General's Award for English Language Poetry in 2010. Could you tell us more about this book, please?
Yes. I was very fortunate about that. I was so happy that it happened. For a lot of years, I had published in rather offbeat places. My first two books of poems were very obscure, and kind of hard to come by. I was impressed that you found them. And I approached a young Montreal publisher who's now, or his name is Carmen Sternino, and he's now the deputy editor of the magazine The Walrus, which is available on all the newsstands. And he is himself a very fine poet. And I begged him, I badgered him, I tormented him, I nagged him, so that he would put out a selection of my work, plus some new work. So what in the poetry world is called a new and selected. And he says to me, finally, okay, I'll do it. Send me everything. Send me the kitchen sink. And so I sent him everything I had, with a few dropped out that I didn't feel I wanted to have continue or to reappear in print. And he made his selection, and that's this. I made no changes in the selection to this book. I sent him everything, and he picked. Some of the poems were written quite a long time ago. There's one in here called Custom, I think, which was written 1985. And by that time, by the time the book came out, I was 24, 25 years old. But at the same time, he added on quite a long poem called Over the Border, which was recent at that time, about traveling through the United States by Greyhound and Amtrak train in the aftermath of 9/11 and in the midst of the Iraq War. Not so much to moralize about the wars, but to actually feel the temperature of what's going on with Americans. And on a bus, on a train, in a cheap hotel, people are undefended. People will tell you what they think. You get a sense of what their lives are about. And so that was part of it. And I know I was very fortunate because that year there were a lot of good books out, and it was just fortunate. And I'm not returning the award that they chose mine. I know what happened on the jury. I spoke with one of the jurors, and I was a compromise choice. This one wanted one person, someone wanted, but they could all be resigned to accept my book, which was nice. And there were many books that same year that weren't even on the short list that really deserved consideration.
So, more of your work. You wrote the internationally acclaimed biography on Edith Sitwell, and now you're working on an authorized biography of Graham Greene. So could you talk about more about these works?
Yes. My writing life nowadays has two main thrusts. One is the poetry, and I'm not very prolific the last couple of years on the poetry side. My attention has been very much on the biographies. Edith Sitwell, I mentioned a moment ago, was a British poet, a friend of Yeats actually, and a friend of Eliot, and she died in 1964 as sort of the grand old figure of British poetry. It was really, she and Eliot were the outstanding figures. Eliot's reputation survived, hers didn't, and I think that's not quite fair. I think the reason her reputation didn't survive was largely because she was a woman, and I don't think that's quite right, no, and not right at all. The Graham Greene thing is a quite exciting project. I'm working on it now. Edith Sitwell was a very funny woman, but her life was sedentary. So most of what was interesting about her were the long, elaborate, funny stories she told, and then she'd take a drink of a martini. And so it was all kind of an amusing set of tableaus. Whereas Greene's life, and I'm not related to him, was constantly on the move. You may know some of his novels, for example, The Power and the Glory is set in Mexico. The Heart of the Matter is set in Sierra Leone. And The Quiet American is set in Vietnam. And he was a very remarkable man. He suffered from bipolar illness, and it didn't stop him. in his life. It had some effect on him. It made his life messy, but he kept going forward without medication. He was never properly medicated. And one of the things he required was stimulation, because when he'd get down, he'd get really bored. And so he traveled the world constantly and made him a very poor husband to his wife, but that's a whole other issue. And he went to all these trouble spots in the world and sometimes worked as a journalist, but for the most part as a novelist. And so what I'm trying to keep up with in writing this is a story that requires me to know 1 month I have to find out about Mexico. The next month I have to find out about Vietnam. And the sad thing is that when you do this kind of research, for about 2 weeks you know a whole lot about a wonderful country, and then you completely forget it. And you move on to the next thing, and you go back to what you've done, and you say, gosh, I once knew something about that. So that's what I'm working on. I hope to have a draft done by the end of the year.
So this question is kind of like a long introduction behind it. So in a 2010 National Post article, you provided your thoughts regarding who should win the Griffin Poetry Prize. And your opening paragraph stated that you carry an uncashed royalty check in your briefcase as a teaching prop, which you showed to the aspiring poets in your creative writing class at U of T. So could you talk about this a little?
Yes, oh, you have done your research, you're good. Yes, that article. It actually takes me back to an answer I gave to an earlier question. I said there were many good books that came out in 2010. I think none of the titles that were nominated for the Griffin Prize were nominated for the Governor General's Award. So in fact, there was a whole group of wonderful books came out that year. And yes, one of my early poetry books called Crossing the Straits sold practically nothing. And the reason I kept the royalty check, in fact, in a way it was remarkable that there even was a royalty check. I don't think I've had one since with regard to a poetry book, was to make a point to my students that take care of yourself. Don't wander out into the world without looking at the whole life you're going to lead and assume that if you just write a book you care about, the world will take care of you. It won't. So in a way, it's a way of urging my students to get a day job. Or just to get a job that they love. I mean, it's a day job is a put down. I love the work I do. A lot of people love the work they do. So that's why I carried that with me. I haven't pulled it out lately. Now you reminded me I have to do this and show it to them. Yeah.
The last question, I guess, before we move on to taking the questions from the audience. I'm sure that we're eager to hear some more of your poems. So if you could read a couple more, and then we'll go on to the audience.
Oh, okay, sure. It's a little longer. It's not that long. Got some odds and ends here. I should have been more orderly. And it's that man Starnino I referred to a moment ago said to me a little while ago that my happiest poems are elegies. And that's a very funny thing to say. An elegy is, of course, a poem in remembrance of someone who's died. And it's very odd. So what, when I'm down, I go to the newspaper and flip through the obits? I mean, that sounds grisly. But no. An elegy is working through the loss of the person. It's laying claim to the memory. It's honoring the truth about a person. And so this poem is in memory of a Canadian writer named Kildare Dobbs, and you may even have come across him. He died in 2013 at the age of 90. He was originally born in Ireland. His father was a British administrator in India. Kildare utterly rejected the legacy of colonialism, even though his father made his supported them by it, and he got into trouble. He took a job in the colonial civil service in Africa himself, and got into trouble. Someone shot an elephant and left the 2 tusks in his office, and so he got arrested for possession of the tusks. That somehow there was a problem with the licensing. He always denied that he had anything to do with these tusks. However, that determined almost the rest of his life, so that this very handsome young man out of the Navy, made for, I don't know what, politics, movie star, whatever, was in disgrace. So what do you do if you're in disgrace? Come to Canada. That's a joke.